Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. Our topic is changes following a likely Russian victory in Ukraine, part 12. Of course, what we talk about here is likely changes in the international system following the victory of Russia. Of course, uh, it won't be a victory uh, the changes won't be a consequence of just the victory that Russia seems to be approaching, but will be a consequence of all the processes of change that have been going on, where these processes are accelerated by a Russian victory, or what's likely to be a Russian victory, in Ukraine. Uh, I should point out before we get into the discussion, and I should also point out that I expect to be joined by Dee Peers of Around the World with Dee and Friends in just a moment. We just finished our show, and I'm sure she'll be joining me in just a minute. But anyway, uh, this week, or I should say in the last 5 days or so, we have seen the Russians gain total control, of Bakhmut. The long battle of Bakhmut, which I recall correctly started sometime last summer, has ended. It's been a catastrophe for the Ukrainians. The figures are not yet in on how many of the Ukrainian troops have died there and how many Russian troops have died there. Joe Biden is viewing it as a bloodbath for Russia and claims that the Russians have sustained 100,000 fatalities in the conquest, of Bakhmut. I believe, based on the sources that I frequent, that there's no way that there's been 100,000 fatalities on Russia's part, in Bakhmut. It is far smaller than that. I'm not prepared to estimate it. I am prepared to say, though, that most probably Ukraine had a huge amount of fatalities as a
Mm-hmm.
result of this battle. And if anybody has lost 100,000 soldiers in this battle, it is the Ukrainians. Anyway, the long battle has done much to destroy Ukrainian men and equipment and the cohesion, of their army. And the way looks open now for Russian advances on a broad front, in spite of the idea that the Ukrainians are about to launch a counterattack, which it is said in the news that Biden wants and is insisting on, but which President Zelensky is not so sure is a very good idea at this point, because he still has far from the equipment he thinks he needs to pursue such a campaign. A few other developments. Uh, there used to be a bridge uh, actually allowing Okay, a flow of a great deal of traffic between Romania, okay, and Russia. I'm sorry, Romania, okay, and Ukraine. That bridge has now been destroyed. Some people talk of the possibility of U.S. troops doing some kind of intervention. That intervention from Ukraine is no longer possible because they can't get across that bridge. If there's going to be any intervention, it's going to come from Poland. But it's very questionable whether the Poles really want to help to engage in such an intervention. Things are looking grim for the Ukrainians right now, and more grimmer than they looked 2 weeks ago. Hey, Steve Wolfbrandt, great to see you here tonight. So that coming Russian victory looks like it's closer and closer today.
Mm-hmm.
There was an interesting incident which sort of speaks to what's going on in the changing world. Okay. So Zelensky made an appointment to go to Japan, okay, to go to the G7, and to see Lula da Silva there, and to talk to one of the other world leaders there. Okay, and I've heard that he blew off the meeting. He was supposed to meet with Lula and with the Prime Minister, okay, of India, Narendra Modi, and he blew them both off.
Mm.
Okay, and Modi is fairly furious about it, but Lula is livid
Oh, I'm sure.
because he had to go such a long way and did go such a long way to meet with Zelensky at Zelensky's behest, and Zelensky blew off the meeting. It was such an amateurish event. It made no sense.
Unless the U.S. made him, which makes no sense.
But it still makes no sense that he would blow off the meeting, okay, and antagonize two world leaders who might have a role in brokering a peace agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, at this time, Lula is as mad as a hatter, okay, and Narendra Modi only slightly less angry. So we have to see what comes of that. But we still see de-dollarization shaping up. We see it accelerating faster than was expected. I still don't think it's going to be that easy to de-dollarize because the dollar tentacles are in so many places and so many countries own treasury bonds, which they, of course, cannot simply afford to rip up. So I'm not sure de-dollarization is going to happen that fast, but the attempts to do that are accelerating. And of course, the inability of the United States to do anything about the deteriorating military situation in Ukraine and the deteriorating sanctions situation as well. The sanctions have absolutely failed, okay, on Russia. Doesn't appear as though the U.S. has the power to do anything about it
Mm-hmm.
because more and more nations are simply failing to follow the sanctions regime. The whole thing is breaking up. So, uh, it seems to me that that things are happening so fast in relation to the decline of U.S. status, okay, and prestige, that it's hard for me to see them turning around anytime soon. Okay, the U.S., of course, has now changed its minds about sending F-16s to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, F-16 pilots have been training for some time in NATO countries. So pretty soon the F-16s may be flying there, trying to provide air defense for Ukraine. Uh, I don't see them as being very successful. I don't think there are going to be that many F-16s. I think the Kinjal missiles will probably make short work of them, and also the Russian fighters that are the equal, if not the superior, of the F-16s. Uh, which, of course, the generation of the F-16s is ending at this point. They're an old fighter, and it's unlikely they'll be able to do much against the forces the Russians are going to be able to marshal against them. So it looks like that's just another attempt to prolong the war on the part of the United States to hurt Russia. That is not going to work.
No.
As it fails to work, the prestige of the United States goes further and further down because the United States will just look like a helpless giant that can do nothing right. Okay, I think it only remains for upheavals and protests, okay, in Europe to undermine any possible usefulness that NATO may have, okay, in this arena. These protests have the potential to lead to the dissolution of NATO. And then to complete end, okay, to the complete end of the effort in Europe to continue the Ukraine war. And then there will be a situation where the U.S. will be turning to other venues, okay, and to other regions, okay, to try to show that it is still the hegemon. But where can it turn to? Of course, we've been making noises that we can turn to Taiwan, that we can arm Taiwan. But Taiwan is a province. It's a province of China, and we are supposedly committed to the one China policy. how can we arm the government of Taiwan against the government of China and not be violating international law? Of course, we've been violating it all along, but arming Taiwan in this way uh, will simply make a mockery, okay, of international law. And all the nations will turn against us and will not support us in a war in the Taiwan Straits. Maybe we'll get some support from Korea and support from Japan, but I would not bet on that because Japan's leading market, chief market right now, is China. And Korea is very closely tied to China by trade ties. I don't think we're going to easily be able to start that kind of war. Furthermore, the economy of the United States is so deeply intertwined with the economy of China that if we try to be fighting a military action against China and to employ economic sanctions against China um, um, as a result, the first thing that's going to happen is our own economy will crash. And what happens to our government then here in the United States when we have a crashed economy because these idiots started a war against China? That is not going to work. If we are worried about Chinese hegemony or the emergence of a multipolar world, we have to find another way to deal with the other great powers that are constituting the multipolar world.
Mm-hmm.
There is India. There is China, of course. There is Russia. There is Brazil. There are the lesser but still powerful nations, such as Iran. Uh, we're going to have to find a way to deal with those which does not involve any military intervention because we cannot guarantee any longer that our military interventions will be successful or that shock and awe campaigns against these nations will be successful. Okay. I think it is a situation where we are eventually going to turn our eyes towards our own problems here at home. That we will get tired. We may not admit it, we may not explicitly state it, but we will get tired of trying to maintain our hegemony, okay, in the world. And we will turn to the problems we have here at home, such as the infrastructure problems that we have, such as the rebuilding of our own manufacturing base, such as the definancialization of the U.S. Economy and the reemergence of a productive economy based on manufacturing and based on collaborative trade relations with other countries. That is what we have to turn to now. And in this context, painting this picture, we cannot ignore the candidacy of Robert F. Kennedy for president. As the campaign goes on, he will grow in popularity. And as a result of the foreign policy defeat of the Biden administration, the defeat by Russia, and the coming defeats by other great powers, the popularity of Joe Biden will continue to spiral down, and that of Robert F. Kennedy will continue to spiral up. And what would be the consequence if one of the consequences of defeat of Russian victory, in Ukraine, is an eventual victory by Robert F. Kennedy in the presidency? What will those consequences be like? It seems to me Robert will have little choice than to turn to a collaborative foreign policy abroad, seeking collaboration when it comes to the climate emergency, and to policies at home that emphasize the rebuilding of America and the reduction of inequality here at home. That is going to have to be his major emphasis. One thing that will have to be done to change our foreign policy, and I think this will have to be done quickly, is we will have to turn again, as we did a long time ago, to good neighbor policies in Latin America. We'll have to stop interfering in domestic politics in Latin America, which in turn will result in continuous victories of the socialist regimes and the socialist parties in Latin America. We will have to become more friendly to socialism here at home. There will have to be essentially pitched political battles here against the domination of neoliberal elites here in the United States, and their replacement with leaders more friendly to mixed economies and to socialism. And I don't mean to the lemon socialism, of neoliberalism. I mean to the honest to God socialism that focuses on creating a much more equal political and economic system here in the United States, with far stronger safety nets and with serious commitments to the climate. So I see that happening. I don't think it's going to take too many years either. Things are changing fast around us, and we are going to have to adapt to those changes. One interesting question is how Trump will adapt to those changes. how he is adapting now to those changes. He has already called for an end to the war in Ukraine, but he won't be able to hide that the end of the war in Ukraine is a military, well, I shouldn't say a military, but both a combined military and economic defeat for the United States in Ukraine, and a great reduction in the prestige and status and power of the United States. How will he respond to that when he doesn't want to get involved in war there? Well, if he wins the presidency back again, which is distinctly a possibility, he will probably abandon Europe and try to turn to war with China. But he will find that our military is not ready, that it doesn't have the capability to fight with China, that it will need time to prepare. It will need time to convert our manufacturing to wartime manufacturing. How will he be able to do that exactly? It won't be easy for him because the elites in the Republican Party are going to oppose that. And because as we try to rearm, and I do think there's a rearmament problem here, if we decide we want to run a hostile foreign policy to everybody else in the world, we have to recognize we don't have the capability. And we have to take our industrial capability and reorient it again to war and to producing huge quantities of things like tanks and huge quantities of hypersonic missiles. And we'll have to develop superior technology to the Russians and the Chinese. That's going to be quite a job for us. It's going to take a tremendous effort. If Trump wins, can he get the country mobilized behind such an effort when all the country will want to do is to get back to prosperity? Well, we know fascist leaders can mobilize their country for war. But can they do it for years at a time? What facilitated the rise of Hitler in the 1930s was the fact that the European powers, the French and British, had become very alienated by the aftermath of World War I. And they had no stomach for war. And as Germany rearmed, with each success, internally, Germany became more confident of what Hitler was doing and more willing to accept his continuing mobilization, of Germany. But where are we going to find the international victories that Germany found to whip up our population? We're not going to have those because the Russians and Chinese are not going to tolerate having an arms race with us without responding in kind. And the Chinese and Russian manufacturing industrial complexes, as a result of our own export of manufacturing capability, are today stronger than what we have. And both countries will have the will to use their manufacturing capability to counter us. Unlike the British and the French and the Americans during the interwar period, during the 1920s and the 1930s. They are on the rise, and they will have the stomach to counter us. So we will not get the encouragement of occasional victories, like the march of the Germans into the Rhineland, like the absorption of Czechoslovakia, like the proxy war victories that the Germans and Italians had in Spain. We won't have those sources of encouragement. How likely is it, therefore, that in a case of a Trump victory, that he will be able to mobilize the United States behind the idea of preparing for war with China, and Russia and the BRICS nations? That's what he will have to do, fascist though he is. I don't think he's capable of doing that. So these are just some thoughts I've had about the changes that are likely to occur. Against the drift towards a military option to oppose the rising nations, we have the positive vision that China presents to the rest of the world. The infrastructure accomplishments of China are staggering. We see all the evidence of it around us. Yes, a lot of it is Chinese propaganda. But the reality of huge infrastructure changes in China and substantial progress towards redevelopment in Russia, those realities are too striking to ignore in order even to compete with them. We are going to have to turn inward and redevelop here. We're going to have much greater planning in our economy, much greater regulation of business to begin to produce for the public purpose and not just for short-term profits. We are going to have to change and to definancialize and to worry less about what happens in the stock market and worry more about what's happening on main streets across the country. Are we ready for that? Okay, I hope so. And I really do believe that if Robert F. Kennedy carries the fight to the end and doesn't accept the result of a primary that promises to be ridiculously rigged against him. But if finding that, he decides that he will fight to the end and run as an independent or run as a third-party candidate, then I think that U.S. voters will choose him in preference to Donald Trump and will choose the hope that he will offer in relation to the policies that he advocates for, and that he will sweep in a huge victory during the election. I think that is what is likely to happen. And all the more so if those of us who believe in dump the corruption can get him to run a dump the corruption campaign. I don't know if we can do that. But if we can, it would empower his campaign and empower his capability to break away from the two-party system if necessary. And that, I think, has to be a part of the redevelopment of the United States, of the revival of United States politics, of the revival of democracy here in the United States. So, Dee, what do you think about all this? I'm going to give you your shots right now.
You brought up so much, but it is a changing world. And I have to say, a couple of years ago, when I was looking at the astrological charts and all, and it talked about the change coming, that there was change coming. And then when we saw the way planets were aligned, Mars, and what was going on with Russia and the United States, there was going to be a conflict coming, and that came. So, I mean, there is change coming. And, I mean, it's the matter of the USA to get on board. But, like you said, if Trump wins, Trump, we know, doesn't want war. He doesn't want it, but he's going to have the push of his Republican cohorts and the donors are all going to want to push him to war. So that's going to be a conflict.
I don't know if
And,
all the donors are going to want to push him to war.
well, a lot of them will go,
The distinctive thing about Trump is that he wants to work with his donors to get himself still richer and to get his donors richer. So, if he can figure out a way to do business with China,
that's more up his alley.
well, it's more up to them, but they're not interested in war with the United States. They're
And China
interested
doesn't
in the
want.
Belt and Road Initiative.
Right, that's what they want.
And if they give Trump a way to cash in on the Belt and Road Initiative, I mean, Trump and his donors, then that's what may happen. Of course, the United States will have to start talking a different vision than the Belt and Road Initiative. But if it becomes a collaborative vision, a way to cash in on the Belt and Road Initiative, that's what Trump is going to look for.
Right.
He's not going to look for a way to fight them.
No.
So Bonnie asks, didn't he want to get rid of the Constitution? Yes, he didn't want to get rid of the Constitution. By the way, he can do it in a legal way. What he can do is to join the push for an Article 5 convention and have the Constitution defanged through the changes that come out of an Article 5 convention. So he doesn't have to do that, in an illegal way. He can find various ways to do it. But I'm not sure that affects our foreign policy. What we're talking about here is whether he will turn to war if he wins at foreign policy, or whether he will turn to commercialization and increased riches for himself and his cronies. I think he will look for opportunities to do that. In his first presidency, he looked for and found ways to work with the Saudis that were profitable both for he and the Saudis. He doesn't have any scruples about collaborating with authoritarian regimes.
I mean, if he could work with Kim Jong-un, he would do that. But Kim Jong-un doesn't want any part of capitalism.
Right.
But if there was a way to do something, Trump would be on board.
If there are international trade deals that were likely to benefit Trump, his family, and his cronies,
Hmm.
he would take those in a New York second.
He would.
So the possibility emerges, can Trump be bribed by the BRICS if he wins the presidency?
He could be bribed by them.
I think he could be bribed.
He's, like I said, he's a businessman first. Even though he would be president, but he's lived his life with business deals.
Yes, he's lived his life, okay, with business deals.
Right.
And in that respect, he has an identity of interest with the Chinese,
Yes.
who are primarily interested in business deals.
Mm-hmm.
So we could well end up with a domestic dictatorship with a greater degree of inequality here, with continuing increase in the gap between the rich and the poor here, or the rich and the middle class and the poor here. And but on the other hand, we could end up with international peace.
Mm-hmm.
That could be miserable for most Americans,
Yes.
upon how badly the dictatorship treats us.
Right. And the thing with China is that the people are happy. They're happy. On all the polls that they have, the people are happy with their government. They're happy in general because each province, I mean, they have it where their needs are being met. And China looks, if they do have problems, they look to how can we fix the problems. So when they
Their
did polls
needs
in China, that they are happy with their government, they're happy with their news, and they're overall happy. Whereas over here, people are miserable, and it doesn't matter who's in office.
Also, depending on what you mean by democracy, in other words, the very definition of democracy is being called into question by events in the international sphere, or really by developments in the foreign nations that are developing. For example, in Russia, it's apparent to people who know Russia well that Putin is not a dictator. If by
Right.
dictator we mean somebody who rules by force and by fear, okay, as Stalin did. The way Putin rules is through councils where various people have a voice through discussions, mostly through consensus building. Now, there are some people that stand outside of that consensus and want to go their own way. And they can be so far outside that they are severely punished, and no doubt that is going on in Russia. But the main trend is towards a lot of internal deliberation and consensus building in how Russia is going to work over a period of time. And we see the long scope of Putin's rule since 1999 trending towards that kind of a result, which is why the people of Russia are pretty damn happy with him also. And also, the Communist Party in China has developed certain mechanisms for taking account of needs from the bottom up, adapting to those needs, and satisfying the needs that emanate from the bottom. That is a kind of democracy that we have been denying ourselves here because our elites are not listening to the needs that are coming up from the bottom. So some people are raising the question, is America really more democratic than China? And there are arguments to be made that we are not. That from a certain point of view of what democracy is, well, yes, we are, of course. From that point of view, China is not the kind of democracy that we have here. I mean, there's one party rule, okay, in China. There's an analogy to that, by the way, in Mexico. For years, Mexico had one party rule. That started to change. When I guess in the 1980s, I've sort of lost grasp of the Mexican history I once had. But during the one party rule period, the Mexicans developed a system for letting needs percolate through the party from the bottom. And presidents were elected who would fulfill those needs. Specifically, Cardenas comes to mind, especially Lázaro Cardenas. But there were others who listened to the bottom, okay, as well. That's why the one-party system lasted so long. It started failing when it became very, very corrupt. And then there was an opening for other parties to develop, and the one-party system fell there. But the initial result of that was that they were dominated for decades by neoliberal parties. It took a long time for AMLO to emerge. He made a number of tries at the presidency and he failed. He finally succeeded. And he's making a lot of change in Mexico, both in foreign policy and domestically. I don't know if a similar thing will happen in China. From what we see now, it doesn't look like their one party system is very corrupt. And it seems like it listens and accommodates to needs coming up from the bottom. As long as it does that, at some levels of their society, they will be more democratic than we are right now. I think we need to keep that in mind because I think that is the truth. So, yes, there may be very bad changes to the right if Trump takes over. It may go hard then with many of our politicians and with many members of the middle class. It may go hard with the working classes too, depending on whether he somehow tries to accommodate the working classes here in America. I don't know whether he will want to do that. As long as he's making his deals and his money, he may want to do that. And there may be something in it for the rest of us. Anyway, I don't know how that's going to develop. I sincerely hope that he does not win. I hope the Democratic Party decides that it's time for reform and lets Robert take over the party. I hope if they don't do that, that there is a way to break their hold and for Robert to win as an independent candidate and to begin the evolution of the changes we need. Okay, any more comments, Dee?
Well, then the big issue is the people. Are the people disgusted enough? Are they disgusted enough?
Are they willing to change by voting against the politicians
Yes.
who are taking the money?
Mm-hmm.
This is not so much about voting for people as it is voting against people who take the money.
Are people disgusted enough with their condition? Are they disgusted enough with what they see around the country? Disgusted with the lack of health care, working to death, seeing people homeless, and lack of food, things that there is the money for. The country doesn't have to be in the condition it's in. It's a choice. Are people disgusted enough to want change? Are they going to go behind Kennedy? That's the big question.
And that is a big question. Okay, and I think it really is a question of whether they go behind Kennedy. Why do I automatically assume that? No, why do I automatically assume that Marianne Williamson is not a better representative of change? Okay, I'm not sure why, but I somehow feel that Marianne doesn't have the same grasp of U.S. politics, okay, and of U.S. history that Robert Kennedy has. Okay. I know Marianne has been listening to Harvey Kay, who has helped her to formulate some of her platform. And of course, Harvey Kay looks back to the New Deal and is very familiar with the goals and ideals that FDR put forward, and he's brought those into Marianne's campaign. But for some reason, I just don't see her inspiring people in the same way that Robert Kennedy can. I don't know if you agree, Dee.
I do agree. I don't see it. I mean, she's a good person, but I just see her more as a spiritual person. I mean, like I said, I've read her books, and she's really a good person, but I don't think she's really fit for the position. I just don't think people are going to really follow her the way they would Kennedy.
I think Robert Kennedy has a grasp of political power that he developed when he was very young, and he saw what was happening to his family and what was happening in politics during the 1960s. But after that, when he began to practice law and to fight over many years for the environment, he had a grasp of the everyday conflicts, okay, in politics and the grasping for power that occurs, and that he was really in close touch with that, in spite of the fact that he wasn't engaged in party politics for all these years. He saw the developments, he saw what was happening, he saw the movement away from democracy, and I think he has an understanding of how to get us back there.
Hmm.
It's not just a matter of the statement and understanding of the ideals and the knowledge, okay, of history, but there also has to be a grasp of the rough and tumble politics that are going to be practiced, okay, in getting us there. That was one thing that distinguished Franklin Roosevelt from other people. He had a gut understanding of politics from way back, from his coming up in New York State politics, which was very, very dirty. And he lived through that, and he won victories in spite of it. He knew how to play rough, and he did it when it was necessary to win. Uh, okay. I don't know that Marianne has that same understanding of how you play rough politics and use rough politics for laudable ends. Okay, I don't know if she can do that and use it for social transformation. And I have a feeling that Bobby can do that.
Well, that's it. He's been around for a long time. And there's a lot of people on the right that like him. That he's had his show for a long time, and they know him. People feel they know him.
Okay, I think they like him because they think he's authentic.
Exactly.
And by the way, I think that that's one reason why they like Trump also. They don't see the conventional politicians, okay, as authentic. They see them as constantly trimming and not telling the public the truth as they see it. They see the conventional politicians as constantly manipulating the public. I'm talking about some pretty good people here, like, the way AOC plays politics, okay, or the way Ro Khanna plays politics.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they talk about politics in such a way that they don't come over as authentic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the conventional Republican politicians, the same way, they don't come over as authentic.
They don't at all.
But Robert comes over as authentic.
And Robert is 70. People always think of him as being extremely young, but he's 70.
Oh, I thought he was only 69, but I take your point. Whether
Right.
he's 69 or 70, he's been around
He,
the block many, many times.
exactly. Exactly.
Okay, and Marianne has not been around the political block for very many years. She turned to politics, maybe 8 years ago or something like that.
Right. Her main thing was her touring, her book tours, and um, her teachings, and that was about it. That's mainly what she did. So people knew her through that lens.
Yes. So she comes over as an idealistic candidate who perhaps does not have the know how to be president. And then also, she trims on certain things. First, she doesn't give a strong impression that she knows about foreign policy very much, that she's new to foreign policy, she's uncertain about it. She hasn't really formulated her views when it comes to Israel. Okay, she knows that she has to be respectful of Palestinian rights when she talks about it, but she's having a very hard time deciding whether she's on the side of human rights or whether she's on the side of Israel. And that comes across in the way she talks about the Middle Eastern issues.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't think that kind of ambiguity will serve her in good stead because it makes her look like a conventional politician who wants to have her cake and eat it too. I think
I
as
mean,
painful as it is, and in this I recognize that her background is Jewish, uh, she has to make a decision. And that's the only way she'll come over as authentic in foreign policy. And that's just with respect to the Israeli issue. She's also been a supporter of uh, uh, a supporter of the Ukraine war. Again, I think this is because she doesn't know much about foreign policy.
right. She wants to follow the Democratic line.
Yes, she doesn't know how much we provoked the Russians, okay, in Ukraine over so many years. And she doesn't know how to talk about that. So, meanwhile, Robert is talking strongly about both domestic policy and foreign policy and has the environmentalist background
Mm-hmm.
and has the family background to do well in politics. So I guess this conversation with you has led me to clarify why I think Robert is likely to be the better candidate. Okay, and if he gets into office, is likely to be the better president of these two people. I think it also clarifies why I think he's going to have a much easier time in getting public support than she will. Okay, let's go over the comments. So Robert Copeland says, I don't trust a lot of the so-called news sources when it comes to war in the Ukraine, like the Hindustan Times, which is a pro-Russian news source. Well, that's fine. Okay. In other words, Robert, uh, it's good that you look at the various news sources and recognize whether they have a pro-Russian news source or a pro-American news source, or whether they're independent, or uh, we need to recognize those things. We need to recognize when there's a bias, either against Russia or for Russia, or just something orthogonal to both of those orientations. Steve Wolfman says, "Yup, of course. I don't know what he was saying that in connection with." And Andy Candy says, "Hi, all. Just listening in and keeping an eye on the terrible 2-year-old, so to speak, twins, laugh out loud. Just the stuff that comes from China alone is advanced. Even their cheap stuff is superior to stuff you buy in the US. Okay, I bought a carboner with an installed knife in it and a rechargeable USB electric lighter for under $10. And the stuff is great. I'm not sure what a carboner is." And she said, "I bought," correction. Steve says, "Hi, Andy." Andy Candy says, "I don't even smoke, but I had to have it just fit example. Now I'm waiting on a double wearable neck fan and also USB rechargeable for just $10.67 and free shipping. Thumbs up. My yin yang is smiling." Andy Candy says, "Trump has criminal court next March." Yeah, he does. And in spite of the fact that he's running for president, the experiences in criminal court might sink him. I agree.
But you never know with Trump.
You
He's
never,
a marketer. He's a good seller. He markets himself. And he knows how to get his base around him.
right. And by the way, he is likely to get 40% support. So then the question becomes, is 40% support enough to win the presidency back?
And the issue with him is the media, they love to put him up there in front of the public. They love doing it because Trump sells.
They love doing it because Trump gets clicks,
He does.
and clicks are what's important for their advertisers. And yeah, that's why CNN put him on.
Yeah.
And by the way, I thought it was disgusting that CNN put him on for that reason.
It is.
I don't believe in completely shutting down Trump, but I think it was egregious of CNN
Mm-hmm.
to give him so much free time.
They would show what an airport, and they would say his plane is going to be arriving in maybe 20 minutes, a half hour. I mean, come on, you couldn't talk about something else during that time.
Yeah, you could
It's
talk about
always
something else, and also, there is the problem that when he starts talking, it's awfully close to sedition.
mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't think that TV stations, I think the TV stations, TV media have forgotten that they have licenses to use the airwaves on the condition that they serve the public interest. And I don't see how sedition serves the public interest. So there's that. Okay, now on a pragmatic basis, I don't want to see him entirely shut down because I believe the cure for destructive speech is constructive speech. But that doesn't mean that I want him to get a whole bunch of free time on CNN because they're after profits. For that kind of behavior, I think they should be socialized in New York Second because they're putting profits ahead of people and profits ahead of the Constitution. Anyway, Andy Candy says, my point is even Chinese cheapo products are superior to US. Says something about advancement and ingenuity that is lacking here hugely. Oh, and I bought laundry detergent sheets that work fantastically. 60 of them for $1.98 and zero plastic waste.
Where?
I think we should look into that.
Yeah, where?
How do we get those, Andy Candy? And D, they have so many good doggy things, it'll make your head spin. Oh, are they big on dogs in China?
Who's they? Who is they?
China. Andy Candy's talking about China.
Oh, okay.
Andy Candy says, just their clothes suck. All polyester, no good. Who is paying for all that electricity that Bitcoin consumes? But even Jimmy has taken the orange pill. You mean Jimmy Dore or Jimmy Carter? Steve Wilbrand says, MW apparently is not a nice person to work for. People are resigning from her campaign like rats off a sinking ship. Okay. I know that Jason resigned from her campaign, and I know that Peter Dow resigned from her campaign. Okay, I don't know why. In the case of Jason, there may have been a conflict between what he wanted to do and what she wanted to do. For certain, I know that Jason's views on Israel didn't seem to me to be compatible with hers. Also, I don't know to what extent she was favorable to MMT and MMT-like arguments, because I know Jason is very strong when it comes to MMT. Uh, perhaps she was talking too much about tax money, or perhaps uh, she hadn't really learned anything from her talk with Stephanie Kelton, and that became apparent to him. Okay, with Peter Dow, okay, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe he became convinced over a period of time that she had no more basic support than he had. Maybe he decided he wanted to run for the presidency himself. Anyway, I would not take it as necessarily correct that their resigning from her campaign was due to her not being a nice person to work for. That may be the case. Andy Candy, but I don't know that really. I don't know the basis for that. Andy Candy says, read that Marburg is coming, will be worse than COVID. War will be on the back burner. Will Kid Kennedy work hard for a vaccine? I think that Kid Kennedy may work hard for a safe vaccine.
That's what I was going to say. Safe. Because everything with the pharmaceutical industry, his big issue is safety.
His big issue is safety. I think his big issue is also excessive profits. But I think the safety issue is very important. For example, there was a study recently done. I think it was a UK study. John Campbell was talking about it, but it could have been a US study too. Uh, People have been following COVID patients for some time, and they've been finding out that the more boosters people take, the more likely it is that they will catch COVID at some point. Until a few months ago, we had been taking all our boosters, and yet we caught COVID about 6 weeks ago. It was a mild case, and we apparently have recovered with no long-term effects, as far as we can see. Maybe a little tiredness still, a little more tiredness than we had before. But if taking too many boosters makes you likely to actually catch COVID, that's a problem. Now, the vaccine companies have been claiming that the vaccines do provide protection against the severity of the illness. And we did have a mild illness, and it could be because we have been faithful in getting our boosters over a period of time. But it could be also be the case that the Omicron version that we caught is just so much more mild than the original strain of COVID that we got a mild case.
And also, you and Bonnie take care of yourselves.
Yeah, we do.
You take supplements that you need and you try the best you can to stay healthy.
And we tried the best we can to avoid COVID as well. In spite of that, we caught it though. Okay,
Right.
I know where and when we caught it. We caught it at Trader Joe's from one of the cashiers we like. Well, he's not simply a cashier. At Trader Joe's, they do all kinds of jobs. They work as a team. But, he was still is one of our favorite people there. And he wasn't feeling well, okay, on one day. Okay. And we were, in contact with him, okay, because he was working as a cashier. And he missed a couple of days of work as a result of that. And we think that that's where we caught COVID from him, even though we were being careful, okay, at the time. But as I said, ours was a mild case. And it's getting to be increasingly the case that you can't avoid it forever. Okay, but anyway, I would like to see much more adequate testing when it comes to the vaccine. I watch Dr. John Campbell a lot, who's a nursing PhD over in the UK. He keeps up very well with the research. He pointed out just yesterday, I believe, that the mRNA vaccines are now moving into the influenza area. Okay. And the UK government had made a deal with the Moderna company for many millions of doses of their new flu vaccine that they're working to come out with. Now, that vaccine was being tested by them. There was a study going on, and the study was a study of 50 people.
Isn't that too many?
50 people. I'm something of a statistician. I'm not a professional statistician. But a lot of my social science work used statistics and some pretty sophisticated statistics. And I taught graduate political statistics when I was teaching as a political scientist. I think I'm pretty knowledgeable when it comes to statistics. And I am telling you that if you are looking for evidence of causality, considering all the various factors that can possibly cause COVID, you cannot do a multivariate causal analysis with 50 people, which will be definitive about whether, okay, I'm soon to say with COVID, okay, but not just with COVID, with any disease, that will show that treatments using such a vaccine will protect people against getting the flu. You can't do it with 50 people. It's just not, okay, a legitimate study. It's a fake study, in my view. It's not statistically justifiable. Andy Candy says, will Kid Kennedy work hard for a vaccine? And then she says, okay, that Marianne might simply meditate about it. She says, laugh out loud. I'm kidding. And Steve says, to be honest, it comes down to Biden or Trump. I'm going with Trump or third party. I'm not going with Biden. My own view is if it's Trump, Biden, or third party, okay, I think I'm going for third party. I too am not going for Biden. Why am I not going for Biden? Biden has put us at risk for nuclear war for the first time in many, many years. In my view, that is unforgivable. Not just because of the destruction that would be caused by nuclear war, but also because if we have a nuclear war, it will then prove impossible for us to cope with the climate emergency if we survive a nuclear war. I think what Biden has done in his foreign policy is unforgivable. It's a monumental failure, and the American people do not know about that failure because they are ignoramuses when it comes to foreign policy. They are not in a position to evaluate how big a failure the Ukraine adventure has been. And by the Ukraine adventure, I just don't mean the war itself. I mean the years of preparation for it, the years of surrounding Russia with NATO nations implicitly hostile towards it, the years of arming those nations, the coup that we masterminded in Ukraine in 2014 to change them from a regime that was neutral between Russia and NATO, but to a regime that was pro NATO and would arm itself to attack Russia at some period of time. That was disastrous foreign policy. Barney says, for what? So that Russia could be damaged so it would never rise again as a major power. That was an effort that was terribly ill-conceived because it was about not allowing the emergence of a multipolar world. It wasn't just Russia. It was the whole project of maintaining the hegemony of the United States. That was totally foolish, totally misconceived, and it's exposed us to nuclear war. And Biden needs to be beaten just on those grounds alone, whatever else he has done. And I don't understand why people don't see it that way. I don't understand why the members of the Democratic Party in Congress don't themselves see it that way. I don't understand why the consultants who run the DNC do not see it that way. I mean, don't they all have children and grandchildren and wives and families? What the hell is going on there? Why expose us to nuclear war once again? Why take on a nation that has hypersonic missiles operative right now that they can fit with nuclear warheads? This kind of craziness was banished decades ago during the 1980s. And now we have it again because of Biden.
And look at our country, too. He's not doing anything here.
No.
He made promises, of course, as they all do.
He made promises, and most of those promises he is not keeping. I mean, what about the travesty on a $15 an hour minimum wage? I respect the parliamentarian.
I know, that was complete BS.
I respect the parliamentarian too. She's entitled to her opinion. She is not responsible for making the decision to accept her recommendation. The senators were responsible for that. The vice president was responsible for that. The
Right.
president was responsible for deciding whether they would go along with that or not. And it was ridiculous that they decided to do so. It was incompetence that they decided to do so. And it was faithlessness that they decided to do so because they promised that in their
And what
plan.
they promised $2,000 checks too.
And Biden clearly promised $2,000 checks. What was it about to reduce those checks to $1,400? What was he trying to say? What was he trying to prove? It would have been just as easy to do the $2,000 checks and say, here, I kept my promise. What kind of schmuck starts trimming on his promises when there's no reason to do so? Is there just an inherent little meanness to have? I'm only going to give these peasants $1,400 instead of $2,000, and then I'm going to fool them by saying that I gave them $2,000 because the $1,400 I gave them plus the $600 Trump gave them equals $2,000. What was that about? And what was it about that he abandoned the American family plan without pushing for it?
And then we talk about, the whole big issue when they were talking about Trump with kids in cages.
Yep. And here
Kids
we have
dying in
Biden
cages.
with kids in cages.
Right.
Joy. Also, the structure. You remember when that thing with steps fell? People were falling down and getting hurt because of the structure falling. Remember?
I don't remember the exact incident, okay, that you're talking about. Steve Hoffman says RFK will pardon Assange on day one. I'm in. Yeah. Yes. How vital is freedom of the press to us? We're supposed to be a democracy. The prosecution of Assange is a direct frontal attack on freedom of the press.
And democracy.
Okay. I expect that from Trump. I don't expect that from someone who is the president of the Democratic Party, as
And the
well as
American.
the president of the United States. What is that about? Why
And then
won't we pardon Assange? What is wrong with that man?
there's a lot wrong with him because we even have that with the the Palestinian American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. Him trying to, bury that.
Yes. And Shireen Abu Akleh.
Yes.
She was an American Palestinian a journalist, and she was assassinated by the Israeli army. And Biden did nothing, said nothing, and later reaffirmed his support for Israel, whatever they choose to do. Killing press people. Biden should be thrown out just because of that. We've already named 4 or 5 things he should be thrown out just because of those. Plus, of course, he takes all the big money. He's corrupt. He won't pass Medicare for all because he has sold out to the healthcare industrial complex. I mean, why do you think he's saying he's never going to sign Medicare for all? Because he's bought lock, stock, and barrel. Why do we have any tolerance for that? We shouldn't have a bit of tolerance for that. And if you reply, well, Trump is bored as well. I agree, Trump is bored as well. That's why I say neither of them. Dump the corruption. Dump every incumbent who takes the big money. And by
And
the
when
way,
it comes,
I'm
I was
sorry.
going to say I was going to say when it comes to Trump and the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party sells itself as the people, for the people. They sell to the African American communities. Let's look at the drinking water, right? It's filthy.
Yes.
Mississippi and
And in spite of the
um,
fact that they made him president,
mhm.
he will not fix their drinking water. What kind of person is that?
He was supposed to be the man that was going to be there for them.
Yes.
I am the person that's going to listen to you.
Yes. So Andy Candy says, I'm more worried that the Hitler of Florida will rise if Cheetolini sinks. I don't think we have to worry that the Hitler, that people are going to turn to the Hitler if Cheetolini sinks. Okay, because Cheetolini is so far ahead of the Hitler right now that it's not funny. Andy Cannon says that was HRC's doing, having the media push Trump, I remember. Andy Candy says, on Timu, Mrs. Firestone. I don't know the reference, Andy.
Oh, is that where she orders this stuff?
Huh?
Remember what she was asking? Bonnie was asking where she orders her stuff from. Is that what?
Oh, yes. So we have to look for Timu. Okay. Thanks, honey. It was getting cold in here, so Bonnie turned off the air conditioner. So Steve Wolfbrand says, but CNN had to cover Trump. He's a former president and the front runner candidate. It's not a question of covering Trump, Steve. Yeah, they had to cover Trump. They have to continue to cover Trump because he's a front runner candidate. He's a former president candidate. But that wasn't covering him. That was giving him free time on CNN. Did Robert Kennedy get free time on CNN? Did Biden get free time on CNN for a campaign deal? No, only Trump got free time on CNN. Steve says, of course, sorry. Andy Canny says, they may not be big on dogs, but they're big on US's love for dogs. Cha-ching.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Andy Canny's really funny. I don't think I ever caught COVID. Vitamin D and zinc boosted, but no more for me. Uh, yeah, Steve, we took a lot of vitamin D2 and a bunch of other supplements. Uh, we take a lot of turmeric also. We're increasing our dosage, okay, of vitamin D and also vitamin K2 because there was another study that was covered by John Campbell. It's a very serious study, thousands of people. Okay. And it focused on giving people high doses, okay, of vitamin D. Okay. And what they found was that if you give people doses between 10,000 at 10,000, I guess, okay, it's milligrams, okay, of vitamin D. Maybe I'll put it 10,000 international units of vitamin D, up to 50,000 units of vitamin D. There were no side effects that were observed. Of course, they gave them vitamin D supplemented, okay, by vitamin K2. But that's the first study to show that. And it suggests that you can experiment with vitamin D for COVID using cheap supplements and take very high doses for very long times, okay, and not have any side effects. Very interesting study. Andy Kenny says, thanks for telling us, Joe. I'll keep using self-checkout and sanitizer even more diligently. At Trader Joe's, you can't use self-checkout. Okay. And Steve Wolfren says, John Campbell has completely changed his mind. To his credit, yes, he changes his mind based on the evidence. He follows the studies, he follows the science, and he changes his mind accordingly. To his credit, he is a real scientist. He is not a PR BSer like the people we often see on television around here. Steve says, and the Biden list goes on. Andy Kenny says, I wish there was a quick way to find out if you ever had COVID in the first place. I think that's more important than anything concerning COVID. Yeah, that is very, very important. Steve says, I'm sure CNN would cover a Biden town hall if he could only form sentences. Yeah, Steve, I think that's quite true. They would cover a Biden town hall if he wanted to have one. But would they cover an RFK town hall? Would they give RFK free time as RFK is rising in the way that they gave Trump free time in 2015 and 2016 when he was rising? That's a question. Steve says, good night, everyone. I think
Good night, Steve.
say good night. Good night, Steve. And thank you for your contributions. Okay, I guess it is time to say good night.
Yes, it is.
So, Dee, have you anything final to say?
I think the issue too would be nice if they do give Kennedy more time, but they're all so bought. You know, the DNC kind of has power over a lot of these stations.
Yeah, because the DNC is, the DNC has power over these stations because well, I'm trying to think of what the source of their power over the stations is. I suppose it's actually through the donors. When you follow the trail back,
It always goes back to the money.
it always goes back to the money. And both CNN and the DNC, okay, are dominated by the donors. Okay, good night, all. I guess that's all I have to say for tonight. I'll be back tomorrow with the Dump the Corruption show, okay, at 9 p.m. One of these days, I might throw in an extra show because I'm once again getting really angry about the situation with the 14th Amendment and the platinum coin and the administration's unwillingness to use either. I think it's political malpractice. And I'm tired of having 10 years of political malpractice on that front. Because, yes, this refusal to use tools that the Democrats have to shut the Republicans down is a decade old now. It started with Obama. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that in 2011 he didn't have time to learn about this stuff. But by the 2012/2013 crisis, he had all the time in the world to learn about it and to use it, either the 14th or the coin. Evelina says, "Hey, Evelina, I didn't know you were here."
Hello, Evelina.
And she says, "Thanks. Really needed to know what your opinion of RFK was. I like Dr. Joe's and Dee's comments. Informative."
Thank you.
I appreciate that. And of course, I appreciate your coming around again.
Yes,
We missed you.
sure did. Yes.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
And we'll see you
tomorrow
tomorrow.
for the corruption. And I'm sure Dee will have a show
Yes, I'll be on at 8 p.m.
of
Eastern
her own.
Time.
Okay, at 8 o'clock. And buy Dee a cup of coffee.
Yes, please. Buy Joe coffee.
And buy me a cup of coffee, too. Andy Candy says, "I don't think Democrats want to shut Republicans down. That's why we didn't get the 600. Yeah, I think there's much to that. Of course, when you say Democrats, we tend to think that it's a unified body. It is not, a unified body. What happens is that there are some Democrats who don't want to shut the Republicans down because they're just like some of the Republicans themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of those Democrats, maybe 10 of them.
Definitely.
Okay, and if it may be that Biden didn't want to give the $2,000 because he was pandering to them, because he was trying to put up a front that was basically saying, "Well, I'm responsible, so I'm fiscally responsible, so I'm not going to give them the whole 2,000, even though I promised it to them. I'm going to give them only 1,400 because I'm signaling to everybody that I'm fiscally responsible." He likes to signal that he's fiscally responsible. He's fiscally
Yeah, and what was really signaling was that he's an a-hole.
Yes. But real fiscal responsibility is not about spending less. Real fiscal responsibility is about spending for the public purpose, however much it costs. People needed that $2,000 check at that time.
Mm-hmm.
They also needed to have various regulatory measures taken to shut down the corporations and prevent them from price gouging. It should have been apparent to Biden and his advisors that with all the money flowing into the economy, there was a danger of inflation, not from the demand side, but from the supply side, where supply chain interruptions and price gouging would be the major factors in inflation. And he was in a position to ensure that there would not be price gouging. Andy Candy says, now he's doing it with a debt ceiling BS. That's what he's about. He's trying to signal he's fiscally responsible with the debt ceiling crap. But nobody thinks he's fiscally responsible because he's risking crashing the whole economy, and that he's willing to make a deal with the Republicans that's going to hurt poor people and middle class people and hurt the economy, the macro economy also, because less money will be flowing into it. That he wants to do it for the sake of signaling fiscal responsibility to everybody.
It's
I,
too late for that.
the man has just lost it.
He
He's
has. Look
lost
at with the war or the billions and billions and billions. How is that fiscally responsible?
it. Yeah. How is that fiscally responsible?
Right.
Okay, especially since the war is not consistent with the public purpose anyway. It's
Exactly.
the opposite of fiscal responsibility. Now, someone's going to say, well, maybe from your point of view, it's not consistent with the Republic purpose, but from my point of view, it is, because we really needed to weaken the Russians, stop them from becoming a world power again. Well, okay, if you believe that, I'm not going to argue with you. You go right on believing it. I'm going to go right on believing that to try to hold back the multipolar world is like King Canute trying to hold back the waves of the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
It is just stupid. He should have jumped on multipolarity years ago. We should have been trying to foster it,
Mm-hmm.
not trying to block it. We should have been following a collaborative foreign policy for decades now. We shouldn't have been trying to shut the Russians down. In the early 2000s, in the late 90s and the early 2000s, we should have been trying to lift them up,
Mm-hmm.
because during the 90s, we were looting them and we owed them that. Good night, everybody. On
Good
that
night. See you tomorrow.
note, say good night.